All right.
All righty. Okay. This is where we left last time. Recording in progress. Boom. So many thanks for joining me today. We are going to delve into topics that are prevalent on every campus across the country, every school in Pennsylvania. As aid officers, and I used to be one, we know that our jobs really don't stop with the administration of financial aid programs, right? So in honor of last week's Financial Aid Day, thank you, Neville Brown, let's acknowledge that what we're all psychologists, we're CPAs, we're family counselors, financial counselors, teachers, preachers, we're etc. And you can add to that list in the chat. So not only will we identify the causes of this financial inequity issue we have going on, we're going to discuss some solutions today. So over the past year, Inceptia has focused on some of the root causes of financial inequities. And we had 3 webinars that we provided, full webinars. And 3 of these 3 really resonated with our school partners. So we took some information from these 3 webinars, and I'm bringing you the highlights from them. However, you are welcome to get into our webinar section on our website so that you can take the information, the resources, those aha moments, and use them, refer to them over and over again. You can see the full webinars in their entirety. Again, I'm gonna only do the highlights here from these 3 webinars. First up, food insecurity. So food insecurity was all about learning what your colleagues are doing and providing solutions for the food insecurity on their campuses. The participants in this webinar were Claire Cady, Megan Patel, and Shauna Bell. So I really encourage you to read the research that's coming out of, fast fingers, that are coming out of this particular study. It included both 2-year and 4-year schools, public and private institutions. And what I think when I looked at this data, it's a testament that 43,000 students responded to this survey. That's telling. It identifies that there's a true need on every campus. So the researchers dug a little deeper, knowing that there were certain subpopulations that are more significantly affected than others. And the data here really confirms that. It's a huge issue. It needs to be addressed. And really take a look at these populations that are especially vulnerable. So we're going to see some crossing or intersectionality between the issues of food and housing insecurity and racial wealth inequity, and how that combines with other socioeconomic markers like Pell Grant data. So how do we help specific populations that need more assistance? Well, one of the things I think you shouldn't do is to make an assumption about what issues people are not dealing with, what your students are not dealing with. For example, students on meal plans are not immune from food insecurity. Of course, you may have a requirement that those students live on campus. So what's the first thing students do when they start looking at meal plans? They go to the cheapest one, right? They don't understand or realize that that's not going to cover all their meals. So, and they're figuring out a way, trying to figure out a way, how do I cut costs? They're going to that cheapest meal plan. Some students living in the dorms will find themselves homeless during closures, and I bet you can identify with students that this happens to. It applies to out-of-state students, foster youth, LGBTQ students.
Hi, Katie, this is Wendy Monsky. How are you? Doing all right. Sorry that you're having trouble getting through to us. I'm not sure what's going on, but
can we mute that person who's having that conversation? But additionally, so some of those LGBTQ students who really don't have the option of going home. So, and this was a hard one for me. A job doesn't also provide immunity from these issues either. So students who are working are more at risk of food insecurity because they don't have enough resources and they can't work enough hours to cover their basic amenities. And it's a vicious cycle. We all see it, a vicious cycle of not having enough to eat, but working longer hours that impact their academic performance. So let's talk about some of the outcomes here when that happens. And I think intuitively, we already know what those academic outcomes look like, right? We already know. We've seen it. It happens in our offices all the time. Compounding this problem is that students are not or cannot access support and services that could help. For instance, a lot of students can't access SNAP benefits because they have stringent work requirements. So those students usually have to find the off-campus job because most on-campus jobs are going to cap the hours. Working off-campus may not be an option for those without transportation or those flexible class schedules. Housing insecure students are often unable to receive assistance because of stringent policies. So if they live at home with their family who's receiving voucher assisted housing, they risk the entire family of losing that assistance if that student is discovered living there without a full-time job. It's really a tangled web. It's hard, very hard. So let's talk about some of the solutions here. So one of the first things that you can do is know your students. Measure the issue of food insecurity on your campus. Look for those populations who may be at more risk and that have that food insecurity. Identify your resources. What services do you currently have available on your campus? Many campuses have started programs to help with this situation, but you know which individuals are leading that charge and figure out a way for you all to come together to help. Once you've pulled all of your resources, make it easy for students to find them, having that one place or one person for them to go to. Build out programs and partnerships. You don't have to reinvent the wheel if your community is already doing some type of programming. And of course, you got to track and evaluate because data is king, right? Educate yourself and others on this issue. Read this information, educate, and so that you can advocate for change. So some of the myths that come up, nutrition has nothing to do with financial wellness, right? No, of course not. Of course, what we eat plays a huge role in determining our overall health. When we eat well, we stay healthier and have a better opportunity to move forward with our work. So I'm curious to hear about your campus's efforts on food insecurity. You can put that information in the chat. Looking forward to hearing about that. The chat's still empty. Come. What are you doing on your campus? I want to showcase some of you. And usually I have treats to push out to the audience. Virtually, I can't do that. I can't throw a now to you and say, or a pin or so forth, but you got a nice goodie bag. So come on, put something in the chat here. Tell me what you're doing on your campus. Okay, the next webinar that we did was on gender issues in personal finance. Jen Hemphill was our presenter for this particular webinar. She handled the particular information that she did was entitled Handling Money Like a Girl Boss. So for those of you who just joined, this is information that's being presented, part of 3 webinars that Inceptia provided. You can access the webinars, excuse me, in their entirety on our webpage under inceptia.org/webinars. So here's what we know. From the time that we have, from the time our kids were young, we spent a lot of time talking to girls about money. We spent a lot of time talking to boys about money. However, this particular chart gives us some really good information about how parents talk to money and how they self-reported about talking more with their boys than they did their girls. So they talked with boys about money, the girls about money, but they talked with their boys more about building financial wealth. For girls, it was more of from a homemaking perspective. So this disparity that you see here can have far-reaching effects on how we socialize with girls, with women, to think about money and how they plan for the future. And this quote by Professor Lindsay Romo really hones in on the results of this particular survey that T. Rowe Price did. So the antiquated approach to gender norming financial discussions is unfortunate when we look at the trends regarding women and higher education. So women, I'm sure you've seen this on many campuses, there are more women going to college than men. Women are shouldering the majority of the burden when it comes to the cost for college and the growing student debt here in the US. And it's basically 66%, or $883 billion. This is explained by the fact that women also comprise 56% of the student population. So I want you to keep this statistic in mind as we're going to continue on, but we can already see that the burden of holding 66% of the student debt trickles down into everyday finances for women when they enter repayment. It's a crippling burden that prevents 34% of women from meeting other essential expenses. And that number grows to almost 60% for Black women. So despite the fact that women are the majority of college goers, despite the fact that women struggle with college debt, the inequity that started at home is persisting. Half of boy-only households are saving for college versus 35% of girl-only homes. 83% of boy-only households make monthly college savings contributions versus 70% of girl-only households. And boy-only homes are willing to take on debt to send their boys to school and willing to make it be more expensive school and to cover all of the cost. So this is telling for what we perceive. We think we are doing a good job, but these are self-reported information coming from households. Cheryl Wincor-Monk from the Wall Street Journal says it very well. All of these statements create a compelling argument that we have failed women, and we continue to fail women when we don't have meaningful conversations about money and really work to undo the financial socialization that may be preventing women from seeking this information on their own. So, Equal Pay Day, this past April, it was the day on which the average US woman's wage was equal to the average US male wage in 2018. So these numbers are going to vary depending on the source, but typically US women earned 77 to 81 cents for every dollar a man earns. People who argue against this gender pay gap say that women don't either pursue higher paying jobs or simply need to go back to school. But the truth is that even in fields dominated by women, like teaching or nursing, men still earn more. Women with bachelor's degrees earn the same as men with associate degrees. Women in advanced degrees earn less than men with bachelor degrees. The gap widens for ethnic minority women, as indicated here. So we as financial educators, what do we do to help? We can help bridge this gap through the work that we're already doing, but we have to make a greater effort to help women. So there's a FINRA study that was released in 2018, and it found that offering financial education is skewed to benefit males versus females at a rate of 43% for women and for men and 33% for women. So we have to figure out our messaging to get to the heart of this issue and help women realize that they too have a voice in this conversation. So what do we do to help? Financial confidence defined. A good starting point is a discussion with your students, with your female students, and to take a step back and help them, pull them into this conversation. There are 4 ways to increase their confidence. 1, talk about money. Host discussions where female students educate each other on a specific topic and help them identify the resources that will be helpful for them to learn about money. Take action, focusing on the quick wins first. Remember how great it is to tackle an overdue goal. Surround yourself with the financial competence with people who are, if you've heard this adage, hang out with people that you want to emulate, okay? So we're all going to help these women figure out a way to hang out with Oprah. Do financial confidence check-ins. So we want to begin with an initial rating and a discussion, and periodically do some check-ins. The simple act of seeing your progress over time about how that rating has changed can help with the self-realization that women are capable. The final webinar that Inceptia provided was on the racial wealth divide. There were 3 participants in this particular webinar: Lillian Singh, Kristen Baumick, and Nikki Paczynski. So here is some information on how race intersects with economics in the US. So when we go through this, we will see how the racial wealth divide in America is rooted in capitalism. It's all about the money, right? So as we can see, Native Americans weren't oppressed only because they were Native American, but because they possessed land that others wanted. And the enslavement of African Americans wasn't just because they were Black, but also because they were viewed as free labor. So these injustices, these financial injustices, were born out of greed, out of capitalism, and had a cascading negative effects far into the future. And for you history buffs, you already know this. The Social Security Act of 1935, this was America's safety net, right? It excluded a third, by law, a third of all American workers, including farm workers, domestic workers, and we know that those were predominantly, at that point in time, were predominantly people of color. They were removed from coverage under the legislation. So the cost of excluding African Americans from this legislation comes to the cost of about $143 billion in relation when you look at it in dollars in 2016. White workers were also denied the benefits of Social Security as well if they were also farm workers and domestic workers. They were denied to the tune of $461 billion. Both white farm workers and domestic farm workers were included. African Americans and other minority workers bore the brunt of the impact as they comprised a much larger share of those others, of the white farm workers that were excluded, and about 2/3, honestly, compared to white workers. So the cards were stacked. Redlining continued here. What you see here is a picture of Chicago where redlining had the most adverse impact on families of color. Another fact that played into it was the racial wealth divide was the GI Bill of 1944. This act is credited with providing millions of returning veterans, World War II veterans, with the opportunity to wealth building opportunities. Many of the African American veterans were disproportionately denied and for example, 13 Mississippi cities were found that African American service members received just 2 of the 3,229 loans made by the Department of Veteran Affairs to support home ownership, business, and training. The culmination of all of this discrimination that was put into place created an opportunity gap. So we can see here from this chart that there's the income gap that widens between white earners, between Latino earners, and Black families. For every dollar a white household earns, they see a wealth return of $19.51, whereas Black and Latino households see a wealth return of about $4.80 and $3.63, respectively. Education, where we all are, is thought to be many the gateway out of poverty. So it's not necessarily a reality for communities of color. Why? Because it doesn't allow families to build wealth. They don't earn as much as we've seen, saw with women. We don't earn as much as our counterparts across all levels of degree attainment. So we can look at this graph, and for Blacks, getting a college degree or a graduate degree is far from sufficient for the college wealth gap. At every level of attainment, the median wealth for Black families is substantially lower than for white families. Black and Latino households need an advanced degree to obtain middle-class wealth or higher, while white households on average needed only a high school diploma to attain the same level of wealth. All of these factors, including family wealth, family income, family savings, are the invisible barriers for your students on your campus, for those invisible barriers for those students of color that are stepping onto your campuses. So what do we do for these solutions? What can you do to support students of color? Lillian had a wonderful set of suggestions that came from her research. Honor the language, take inventory, empower students to tell their stories, create safe places, enhance financial aid visibility. All of these factors are important for helping students as they move forward. There's a TED Talk from Deneen Simmons on students of color that is available. Another solution is to integrate wealth and equity into your financial education curriculum. And this particular idea comes to us from the University of Michigan, where they have a financial literacy course called the Financially Savvy Student. Chrissy Baumick is the associate professor for this, for their Financial Wellness Summit. And one of the modules in the course is called Wealth Inequity and Inequity of Opportunity. And she partners with faculty on campus that study this issue to help students understand the finance, wealth, and education issues associated with inequity. One of the suggestions for integrating the wealth divide into your work comes from the University of Minnesota at Duluth. So this initiative is headed by Nikki Pakinski, who is the financial literacy educator there. Nikki's approach is to have students complete a written assignment early on to help them identify their own personal money story and how that's impacted by issues of family, race, and culture. And it really forms the foundation from which peer mentors will learn, grow, and understand how each student comes to campus, and to see them, truly see them with different money stories than their own. It's an empathy building exercise that ultimately guides how they conduct peer sessions with those from vast and varied backgrounds and circumstances. One of the tools used to facilitate the learning money story that Nikki uses is from the PBS documentary Race, the Power of Illusion, and it's episode 3, The House We Live In. After watching the documentary together, they immediately reflect upon some questions, but learning doesn't stop there. They continue their discussion a week later, delving into the issue, and they use a Think, Pair, Share initiative to write out their answers individually and team up to discuss and share with each other. So here is some information that you can use. All of this information again is on our website, but here's some, if you want to jot these down, or they'll be in the recording or on, I think we've got the PowerPoints stored somewhere on the website. So you can grab this information to use on your campus. And additional resources here. Food for thought. We all, as well as financial aid officers and educators everywhere, need to acknowledge the disparity in financial education and money matters, as we've seen over these 3, just the highlights from these 3 webinars. So we can enhance our tools, our methods, as we continue to educate our populations about money. So are your wheels turning? I've presented you with some thought-provoking information and actionable items on financial behaviors as it relates to issues of inequity, for gender, for food insecurity, and the racial divide that we have going on. So I see you've got some information here in the chat. I'm going to take a look at this. I want you to, if you want to take yourselves off mute and share your thoughts, and more importantly, your next steps for continuing this discussion and actions that you will take to move this discussion forward. So let me see what's in the chat here. So Anne says you have an on-campus and off-campus food pantry for students. We also partner with the Office of Education and Equity for information sessions aimed at Pell students. Lori says we have a food pantry as well. Linda, we have a food pantry called Catherine's Cupboard. Love it. Students who need to can come and eat and take food with them. George, we also have a food pantry called Pioneer Pantry. Anyone can come and get food with no questions asked. Sherry, we have a food pantry through the Dean of Students. There's also the Hope Center that provides resources to students. And their office provides information to make it easier for eligible students to apply for SNAP. Can we mention the TED Talk again? I'm going to find the TED Talk, Sherry, and post that so that you can have access to that. I've got to go back a few slides, but I can do that. So please take yourselves off mute and let's discuss what your options are, what you're doing. Any ideas that you have, your colleagues want to hear that. And I'm going to scroll back a few slides and see if I can find the TED Talk.
Hi, this is Ann Grabowski. Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, so I work as our office's outreach coordinator, so I'm working with a lot of other areas of education. And I had an instance last week that I think kind of works with what we're talking about. A professor that was working with the student was chastising the student for working while being in school, saying that it was indicative of poor planning on the student's part. And obviously I disagree, but this professor doubled down and said, you know, it was basically coming from a place of if there is financial need, it's on the student. And that is not at all the message we want to convey, and was not a pleasant conversation for anyone. How would you address somebody like that who's digging their heels in and says, no, this isn't an actual issue? How would you talk with them?
So my first reaction and is to, needs to be a lesson in empathy in helping a professor understand what should happen. Here's how the conversation should go. And so if there is an issue on your campus where you have conversations like this happening, the first place that I would turn to, and many campuses have or are adding this type of office, but a office on diversity, education, inclusion. I'm saying it wrong. DEI. Diversity, I'm missing the E, and inclusion.
Equity.
Thank you. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have DEI offices on campus that may be able to help with this conversation. That's the first place to turn to. This professor has tenure.
Thank you.
It's going to be tough, but this discussion needs to be raised to the appropriate offices.
I really don't think professors should be getting involved with students' personal lives. Perhaps there's more to the story. Perhaps the student said they couldn't complete an assignment because they were working.
The student was unable to take an unpaid internship because they needed to maintain an income, and the professor was angry because the direct quote was, "You're passing up an opportunity because you didn't plan," which is not true, but that's what the professor said to the student. So the full picture is turning down an unpaid internship because the individual needed to work.
Okay, so again, I would look at your DEI office and raise that concern to up the food chain here, that so that the professor or professors or staff members can understand where students are coming. You have to be on their level and understand the disparities here. And that's why we're talking about this today, to make you aware, to help you with some tools to go forward with that. And understand that these are just the highlights from these webinars. Each of these webinars were over an hour. So there's tons more, there's a lot more information that's within the webinars themselves.
This is Jim. I would think you might want to point out to the professor that saying that the person made poor choices is backward looking and is not actually working to solve the problem at hand. I mean, professors tend to have a lot of resources so, maybe a way to start the conversation is just to point out that that's really very backward looking and is not going to solve the issue of where the student is right now. And maybe the professor could offer some suggestions as to, is there a way to work and do the internship? Or is there a way to get sponsored for the internship? Or something that would actually be forward looking and not backward looking.
Backward looking, right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
And I'm still searching for the kid talk, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hi, Tammy. This is Katrina here. So I do the financial literacy at Westchester. And one of the things that I wrote down, I just wanted to say thank you because the living on a budget, I definitely want to add to our curriculum and things that we do here with our financial literacy. We have about 30 to 40% of our students are Pell recipients. We have a food pantry and things like that, but we don't have specific things when we do like credit and looking at their loan debt and basically how to be an adult. We don't have anything about living on a budget. And I think that would make an excellent addition to our programming that we offer. So I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Hop in. Hop in, because it's a lot of information to cover in a short period of time. But certainly we all face these issues because we as financial aid folks are those that all-inclusive term that I started with. We're the counselors, we're the lawyers, the physicians, the accountants for all of our students. Add to that list.
I just kind of want this is Cherie, by the way, and
Okay.
I just kind of wanted to jump in on that question about the internship and the professor, because I don't know, that feels like a whole case study. And it ties into your presentation with issues of equity. And it kind of ties into how now this student has a barrier and they're kind of being left out of having access to that next level in their education, and also access that could provide them like very important social capital to their postgraduate world or to jobs and resources once they graduate. And it's just, it's kind of sad when I heard that, of how there are professors who might be looking at things from the old school perspective of what the experience used to be for college, but it's really not that anymore for a big portion of students. And then, Tammy, I do wonder how that then would tie back into the diversity equity office at a university, maybe providing some kind of training for professors so they can understand. And I think someone said instead of looking backward, look forward, and a look forward approach is a look for a solution instead of concentrating on what you perceive to be the problem. It's just so much wrapped into that. But at the end of the day, it's really sad for the student who was, number one, insulted by the professor for something that they probably don't have a lot of control over. And number two is might not have the opportunity now to access certain components of their program that they could benefit from because they just received a barrier.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Cherie. I'm saying that wrong. Pronounce your name again.
No, that's correct. It's Cherie. Thank
Cherie.
you.
Okay. Thank you. Nice comments. And I'm sure we all face that every day on our campuses, where we hear something that doesn't just sit right with us, and we're trying to figure out the best way to approach that individual to make it a positive experience. So that's why programming like this should happen on every campus, so that you become educated and you're providing that education to others.
I had a question, something that we struggle with. So we often get notifications of scholarships and different financial aid, and usually from external sources, right? A number of different sources.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these are specific for certain groups. So some are specific for women, some are specific for certain other groups. And our legal department has tended to shy away from us posting these types of resources to students because they target specific groups and are not available to everybody. I was wondering if anybody else has run into that and how they deal with sort of making awareness for opportunities that are out there without posting things that are specific to one group or another.
Good question. Anybody else running into that issue? Jim, this is the first time I've heard that there are scholarships for all types of students. So that's interesting that those particular ones are being segmented on your campus. I mean, you've got scholarships for athletes.
Well, but we can post anything that's internal. You can't post any external scholarships. You couldn't post scholarships for athletes because it's not available to everybody in the student body.
And so they're basing that on what exactly?
I think that the belief that you can't offer a resource like that. You could not endorse a resource that is only available to a specific group, regardless of whatever that group is, right?
I'm sorry, I'm just like, are they doing it based on a particular law? Are they interpreting, did they indicate they're interpreting a particular law like this, or?
I would need to learn more, but I wasn't sure if anyone else had run into that situation where there's reluctance to post scholarships that are for a specific demographic or group.
It would be good to know more about why your campus is taking that stance,
mm-hmm.
and so that you can examine and figure out a way to get that still get that information to those students who need it.
Right.
Need to understand more there.
James, we had a similar issue. I was just actually trying to pull up what our legal department said, but they told us that we also had to be very careful how we posted certain scholarship information and opportunities, because it could potentially violate Title IX prohibitions on gender discrimination in financial aid. And so they had to make sure that the scholarship was being bucketed into like a more general, like where the money actually came out of had to come from the same bucket, even though the title of the scholarship may have been different, that the bucket was the same, then it was okay. But if the bucket were different per scholarship, then we could have run into some issues there.
So when you say buckets, David, do you have an example?
Yeah, so like if you're calling it a strategic partnership scholarship, for instance, and regardless of, the partner, they the scholarship, can be pulled from that general titled bucket, then it's okay, even though the partners may have separate goals. But if you're starting to, have one that's, a women in technology, and you can't have it only being pulled from one title, but like that, it had to be more on the general level where it was like fellowships in technology.
So Jim, here you go. You can it's an opportunity to look at how the scholarship can be distributed in a different fashion, and you and David need to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, happy to share any additional info on it. We ran into it a little bit, but it also just depends on how I think, each institution sets up their funding and promotes it on the website.
Yeah, and for us, it wasn't internal funding, it was external funding. So it was things like that, like somebody notifying us that they have a scholarship for women in technology. I mean, that's a perfect example. And asking if we would post a link to their website, and it's basically the guidance was, no, we can't really post something that is only for women in technology.
Gotcha. Yeah, ours was slightly different, where it was internal. But even then, we still had to deal with our own kind of determinations for making sure that we're not in violation of Title IX.
Right. But maybe it's kind of the same thing. If the organization offers more scholarships than just that one, you could still post to the organization, if not the specific scholarship.
Yeah. I would encourage you to talk to your general counsel's office for them to help you to navigate as well.
Yep.
Okay,
so
thank you.
There's a question from Heather who says, are there any members on the call who have established relationships or programming with their DEI office to address these issues? Our college just created the Office of DEI, so I'd be interested in learning from others who have already established this. So I know we're running short on time, but maybe if you have a DEI office, you can get with Heather and post some information around on the PASFA listserv about learning about the relationship and the programming the DEI office has. And her email is heather.ellerbrock@wilson.edu. You can see it in the chat. Who has a degree on their campus for DEI? I can see that coming too. Wonderful.
All right, no more questions? All right, well, we want to thank you for attending this session today. If you would please fill out your survey on the PASFA website. That helps Tammy and the PASFA Conference Committee. And Tammy, on behalf of the PASFA Conference Committee, we want to thank you for talking about these important subjects that everybody needs to know about. So thank you very much. And everybody have a great conference.